A story of loss, justice, and the cost of a single choice. He had exactly 8 seconds. 8 seconds between the sound of a woman screaming in the dark and the moment he would have to choose his daughter's birthday dinner waiting one floor above, or the desperate voice of a stranger echoing up from the concrete below. 8 seconds, where every lesson the Navy had drilled into his bones fought against every promise he'd made to himself the day he buried his wife. He was done being a weapon, done making choices that cost people everything. He was just a janitor now, a father, a man trying to hold two pieces of a broken life together with bare hands. He chose wrong, or maybe he chose right. He still isn't sure. Before we go any further, if stories like this hit you somewhere deep, somewhere you weren't expecting, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Drop a like if you're already feeling it, and tell me in the comments, what city, what country are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go. The mop handle was cracked along the lower third, had been for about 6 weeks, and every time Damon Cross dragged it across the linoleum floor of Jefferson Elementary's East Corridor, it reminded him with a small, sharp torque that he still hadn't filled out the maintenance request form. He kept meaning to. He kept forgetting. Or maybe he wasn't forgetting. Maybe he just didn't care enough about a cracked mop handle to spend 3 minutes of his lunch break on the paperwork. That was the honest answer, and Damon Cross was nothing if not honest with himself about the small things. It was the big things he'd learned to leave alone. He finished the corridor at 4:47 in the afternoon, same as every Thursday, ran the mop bucket back to the utility closet at the far end of the building, and changed out of his work shirt in the narrow bathroom that smelled permanently of bleach and old rubber. He pulled on a clean gray Henley, splashed water on his face, looked in the mirror for exactly as long as it took to confirm he was presentable, and looked away. The face in his mirror was 37 years old and looked it. Not bad, not broken, just used. There was a scar that cut from the left side of his jaw toward his ear, thin and white now, barely visible unless the light caught it at a specific angle. His hair had started going gray at the temples sometime in the last year, which his daughter Lily thought made him look distinguished, and which Damon thought made him look tired. Both of them were probably right. He locked the utility closet, clocked out at the front desk with a nod to Marcy the receptionist, who was already pulling on her coat, and walked out into the October air. Lily was waiting for him on the front steps of the after-school program 2 blocks over, sitting with her backpack on her lap, and her chin tilted up at the sky, watching something. A bird maybe, or a plane, or just a cloud she'd decided was interesting. She was 9 years old, and she approached the world with a curiosity so unguarded it sometimes made Damon's chest ache in a way he couldn't name. She spotted him half a block away, and her face did the thing it always did. This instantaneous, unfiltered smile that broke across her features like she hadn't seen him in a month instead of 8 hours. "Dad." She stood up, swinging the backpack over one shoulder. "You're 3 minutes late." "Traffic," he said. "You walked." Emotional traffic. He reached out and she grabbed his hand without ceremony, the way she'd been doing since she was small enough to fit in the crook of his arm. "Happy birthday, kid." "You already said that this morning." "I'm saying it again." She leaned against his arm as they walked, her shoulder bumping against his ribs. "Are we still going to Rosario's?" "Made the reservation 2 weeks ago." "And you're getting the boring pasta again?" "I like the boring pasta." "It's literally just butter and noodles, Dad." "It's linguine aglio e olio, and it is a masterwork of restraint." Lily made a sound that was half laugh, half exasperated sigh, the specific combination she'd inherited from her mother, and Damon felt it the way he always did, this small, clean grief that passed through him like wind through an open window. There and gone. He'd learned not to hold on to it too long. Sarah had been dead for 4 years. 4 years, 3 months, and 11 days. Though he'd stopped counting somewhere around month 20. She'd gotten sick 2 years before that, soft-spoken diagnosis in a beige office, stage 3 ovarian cancer, treatable, they said, aggressively so. And for a while they'd believed that. They'd fought it the way they'd fought everything in their marriage. Together, without a lot of drama, with a stubbornness that he'd always thought would be enough. It hadn't been enough. Rosario's was a 20-minute walk from the school, which took them through the merchant district and then down into the lower downtown blocks where the buildings got older and the streetlights came on earlier because the overhead canopy of parking structures blocked out the last of the afternoon light. It was a route Damon had walked dozens of times. He knew the cracked section of sidewalk outside the dry cleaner, knew to steer Lily around the puddle that appeared every time it rained near the corner of 5th and Larimer, knew the sound of the parking garage on Weston Street. That low, specific echo of a structure that went 4 stories underground, concrete and car exhaust, and the squeal of tires on turns too sharp. He heard it before he saw it. Not tires, not exhaust. A woman's voice, sharp and cut off. The kind of sound that happened when someone started to scream and then something, or someone, stopped them. Damon slowed. Lily looked up at him. What? Hold on. He stopped walking entirely, listening. The garage entrance was 30 feet ahead, a ramp descending into fluorescent yellow light. A car passed on the street above. Wind moved between the buildings. Then, again. Low, urgent, the unmistakable register of someone trying not to make noise because making noise had become dangerous. Stay right here, Damon said. Lily's hand tightened around his. Dad, right here. You don't move. You understand me? He looked at her until she nodded, the smile gone from her face, replaced by something older that he hated seeing there. I'll be 30 seconds. You stay at this exact spot. He let go of her hand and moved toward the ramp. Later, the news would describe what happened next in the language of action sequences. Dramatic intervention, heroic takedown, bystander subdues 3 attackers. The footage from the garage's security camera, leaked within 48 hours and viewed 11 million times in the first week, would show 12 seconds of footage that appeared almost choreographed in its efficiency. It wasn't choreography. It was something older and more automatic than that. What Damon saw when he reached the bottom of the ramp. A woman, mid-30s, pressed against the driver's side door of a silver sedan, one man gripping her forearm, a second positioned to her left with something in his hand that caught the light, a third standing back near a concrete pillar with his arms crossed like he was supervising. The woman's jacket was torn at the shoulder. Her briefcase was on the ground, contents scattered. She was not crying. She was very still, and she was watching the men with an expression Damon recognized. Not fear exactly, but the precise, controlled management of fear, the kind of look that meant she was calculating, measuring, waiting for any opening at all. The man holding her arm was talking. Damon heard pieces of it as he came off the ramp. Your company, families like mine, you people don't get to just walk away. Damon didn't announce himself. He didn't say hey or stop or police. He covered the 20 feet between the ramp and the nearest man in 4 seconds, which was the one standing back near the pillar, the supervisor, who turned at the sound of footsteps and had just enough time to register surprise before Damon's forearm connected with the side of his neck in a controlled strike that dropped him immediately. The second man, the one with the object in his hand, a length of metal pipe, Damon clocked it now, turned and swung, and Damon stepped inside the arc of the swing, took the impact on his left shoulder instead of his skull, and put the man on the ground with a move that he had performed so many times under so much higher stakes that his body simply did it without consulting him. The third man, the one holding the woman, released her and came at Damon with something between rage and panic, and that fight lasted approximately 4 seconds and ended with the man face down on the concrete, breathing but not going anywhere. 12 seconds total, beginning to end. Damon straightened up. His shoulder hurt where the pipe had caught it. His heart rate was elevated, but not dramatically so. He looked at the 3 men on the ground, all breathing, none of them in any danger of serious injury unless one of them was stupid enough to get up and try again. And then he looked at the woman. She was still against the car door, still in the same precise stillness. She was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. You okay? He said. It took her a beat to answer. Yes. Her voice was steady. Yes. Thank you. Your phone working? She blinked, looked at her hand, registered that she was somehow still holding her phone. Yes. Call 911. Tell them the garage on Weston, 4th level down. 3 individuals who need police assistance. He glanced at the man near the pillar who was starting to stir. Tell them to hurry. Wait. She pushed off from the car. Who are you? What's your... But Damon was already moving back toward the ramp because his daughter, was standing alone on a street corner 30 feet above him, and it was her birthday, and he had already been gone 45 seconds longer than he'd promised. Lily was exactly where he'd left her. She had her arms crossed and her chin up, the posture she used when she was trying to look unbothered, which she had also inherited directly from her mother. 30 seconds, she said. Sorry. He reached her and did a fast visual check. Same thing he'd always done. Automatic, the same way he checked doorways and sightlines. Just part of how he moved through the world. She was fine. She was fine. Fine. What happened? Someone needed help. Are they okay? They will be. Lily studied him for a moment, the way she did sometimes. This long, considering look that made him feel like she understood more than she let on. Then she uncrossed her arms and took his hand again. Your shoulder's doing the thing, she said. What thing? The thing where you hold it weird because it hurts, but you don't want to say it hurts. He looked down at her. When did you start noticing that? Always. She tugged him gently in the direction of Rosario's. Can we still make the reservation? We're going to make the reservation. And you'll get the boring pasta. And I'll get the linguine. She walked beside him, close enough that their arms touched, and for a few minutes neither of them said anything, just moved through the early dark with the sound of sirens beginning somewhere behind them, far enough back that it was easy to pretend it had nothing to do with them at all. The thing about Damon Cross was that he had spent years becoming someone who didn't cause ripples. After he left the Navy, medical separation, shoulder damage, classified circumstances that he'd signed papers agreeing not to discuss. He had come home to Sarah and Lily in their house in Denver, and he had decided, with the same deliberate discipline he'd applied to everything in his life, to become invisible, not depressed, not defeated, just small, contained. He had wanted a life that fit inside a defined perimeter. He took the janitorial job at Jefferson Elementary because it paid steadily and ended at 5 and left his evenings free for Lily's homework and her Thursday soccer practice, and her increasingly sophisticated opinions about animated films. He'd sold the house after Sarah died and moved them into a 2-bedroom apartment on Glenwood, close enough to the school that he could walk her in the mornings. He had 2 friends, Marcus, a retired firefighter he'd met at a grief support group he'd attended exactly 4 times before deciding group processing wasn't for him, and Elena, who lived upstairs and watched Lily on the rare evenings Damon had to work late. He played basketball on Saturday mornings at the rec center. He read at night after Lily was asleep. He didn't date. He didn't talk about the military. He had built a life that was quiet and functional and safe, and he had been, if not happy, then something close enough to it that most days the distinction didn't matter. That was before the parking garage. The story broke the next morning. Unidentified man disarms 3 attackers, rescues. CEO vanishes before police arrive. The security footage was everywhere by noon. Damon saw it on the TV above the break room coffee maker at the school. 30 seconds of grainy footage that he watched with the strange detachment of seeing himself from outside himself. The 4-second sprint, the precise, efficient way he'd moved through the 3 men, the way he'd walked back toward the ramp without checking to see if anyone was filming. Can you believe this guy? Larry from facilities said behind him, holding a paper cup of coffee and squinting at the screen. FBI-level stuff, just walks away after, like some kind of ghost. Damon looked at the footage for another few seconds. Wild, he said. He finished his coffee and went back to work. At Rosario's the night before, Lily had ordered the carbonara and eaten it with focused attention, the way she ate things she really loved. They'd had a small cake at the table, psyched. The waitress had brought it out with a candle, which Lily had blown out with the slightly self-conscious dignity of someone who was 9 and therefore too old for certain public displays of enthusiasm, but still secretly delighted by them. What did you wish for? Damon asked. Can't say. You've been saying that since you were 5. I've never once violated a birthday wish. You can't know that. She scraped frosting off the side of the plate. What would you wish for, if it was your birthday? He thought about it honestly. I don't know. That's kind of sad. Or I'm already satisfied with my circumstances. Lily gave him the look, the one that meant she was 9 and not stupid. Dad? Okay, maybe I'd wish for the nuggets to finally... Dad. He set down his fork. I don't know, Lil. Something good I haven't thought of yet. He looked at her. Something I can't see coming. She seemed to accept that. She went back to her plate. Outside, the city moved past the restaurant windows, indifferent and bright, and Damon sat across from his daughter and watched her eat birthday cake, and felt briefly and completely like his life was exactly the size it was supposed to be. That feeling lasted until the next afternoon, when the second call came. Not from the police. They'd already left a voicemail he hadn't returned. This one came from a number he didn't recognize, a 415 area code. San Francisco. He let it go to voicemail, the way he'd been letting most things go. The message was 11 seconds long. A woman's voice, low, controlled, with an edge of something underneath that control that sounded like it had been there a long time. Mr. Cross, my name is Ava Sterling. You don't know me, but I think I know who you are. I'd like to talk. Please. A pause. Please. He stood in the utility closet with his phone in his hand for a long time after the message ended. He didn't know why he'd saved it instead of deleting it. He didn't know why, 3 days later, he still hadn't called back. He didn't know why the woman's voice kept returning to him in the quiet moments. Not the words exactly, but the quality of the pause before please, the specific sound of someone holding something heavy they'd been carrying alone for too long. He knew that sound. He'd made it himself, in a different life. He called her back on a Tuesday. No particular reason for Tuesday over any other day. It wasn't like he'd made a decision so much as the decision made itself. Somewhere between loading the dishwasher after Lily's dinner and standing in the kitchen afterward with the lights off, listening to the apartment settle around him the way old buildings do, all creaks and pressure shifts. He'd been avoiding the call for 6 days. He was tired of avoiding it. She picked up on the second ring. Mr. Cross. No surprise in her voice, which meant she'd been expecting him to call eventually, which meant she was someone who understood patience as a strategy. Thank you for calling me back. You said you know who I am, he said. No preamble. He'd never been good at preamble. How? A pause. Not the hesitation of someone thinking, more like someone deciding how much of the truth to lead with. The security footage. The way you moved. I had someone look into Navy SEALs who served in a specific operational window. Your face came up. My file is sealed. Most of it. Another pause. I have resources. He leaned against the kitchen counter. Outside the window, the Glenwood street light had been flickering for 2 weeks, and the city still hadn't fixed it. What do you want, Ms. Sterling? I'd like to meet you in person. That's not an answer to the question. She was quiet long enough that he thought the call might have dropped. Then, I owe you something, more than I can explain over the phone. Her voice had shifted slightly, not softer exactly, but less managed. Something underneath the composure beginning to show itself. I know that's not a satisfying answer. I know you don't have any reason to trust me, but I'm asking you anyway. Damon looked at the flickering streetlight, thought about Lily asleep in the next room, thought about the way the woman in the parking garage had gone still rather than panicked, the particular quality of someone who'd learned to manage fear rather than feel it. Denver, he said. I don't travel. I'll come to you. He gave her the address of a diner on Colfax he'd been going to for 3 years, where the coffee was bad and the booths were private and nobody cared who you were. Thursday, he said, 10 o'clock. I'll be there. He hung up and stood in the dark kitchen for a while longer, not thinking about anything specific, just listening to the building settle and the streetlight flicker and the sound of his daughter breathing through the baby monitor. He still kept on the kitchen counter, even though she was 9 and had told him twice it was embarrassing. He still wasn't sure why he'd agreed to meet her. He told himself it was curiosity. That was easier than the other thing. The faint, uncomfortable recognition that the woman's voice had reminded him of something or someone, without him being able to say exactly what. The story had not gone away the way Damon had hoped. By the end of the first week, 4 separate news outlets had dedicated resources to identifying the garage man, as the tabloids had taken to calling him. 2 of them had run phone-in tip lines. One had offered a $10,000 finder's fee for confirmed identity, which seemed excessive for what amounted to a parking garage altercation that had left 3 men with bruised egos and minor injuries. Damon's picture had not appeared on any of them yet, but the footage had been analyzed by a retired FBI profiler on cable television who had described the man in the video as clearly military-trained, almost certainly special operations, someone who has done this before in circumstances that required him to do it very quickly. which was accurate, and which was why Damon had started taking a different route to work. Marcus had called on Wednesday evening, his voice carrying the specific casualness of a man who was trying not to make a big deal out of something that was obviously a big deal. "You see that thing on the news? About the parking garage?" "Heard something about it," Damon said. "Wild, right? Guy just destroys 3 people and walks away." A pause. "Reminds me of this guy I know. Former military. Very quiet. Works at an elementary school." Marcus. "I'm just saying that..." Marcus. Another pause. "You okay?" "I'm fine." "Lily okay?" "She's great. Great. She wants to know if you're coming to her soccer game Saturday." The deflection worked, the way it usually did with Marcus. Because Marcus was a good friend, and good friends learn when to let something go. They talked about soccer for a few minutes, and then hung up, and Damon went back to the book he'd been trying to read for the past week, which he still hadn't managed to get more than 40 pages into because he kept reading the same paragraph. Ava Sterling arrived at the Colfax Diner at 9:54 on Thursday morning, which meant she'd either been waiting nearby or she was the kind of person who built buffer time into everything. Damon was already in the back booth with coffee he'd barely touched. He recognized her immediately, not just from the garage, but because her face had been in the news for the past 2 years, the kind of low-level cultural presence that tech CEOs accumulated, whether they wanted it or not. Sterling AI Solutions, 30 years old, named to Forbes 30 under 30 twice, which he'd thought was mathematically odd when he'd seen it. Worth somewhere north of $4 billion, depending on the quarter. She looked different in person than she did in photographs. In photographs, she had a corporate precision to her. Hair controlled, expression calibrated, the whole presentation tuned to Project Authority. Sitting down across from him in the diner booth in dark jeans and a plain black jacket, no visible jewelry, no briefcase. She looked like someone who'd taken all of that off deliberately, like removing armor before a conversation that didn't need it. She also looked like she hadn't slept well in several days. "You found it okay?" he said. "GPS." She looked at his coffee. "Is it terrible?" "Reliably." "Good." She flagged the waitress and ordered the same thing without looking at the menu. Then she put both hands flat on the table, a gesture that struck him as oddly deliberate, like she'd decided in advance to make herself physically open. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Before any of this goes further. Before you decide whether you want to hear the rest." He waited. "I looked you up," she said, "after the garage. I know you know that. I told you I did. But what I didn't say on the phone was what I found." She held his eyes. "Your wife's name was Sarah Cross. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in 2018. Her oncologist recommended a treatment protocol that included a clinical trial drug, Marinvax. Compassionate use application was filed with her insurer." A pause. "It was denied." Damon's hands were around the coffee cup. He didn't move them. "Keep going," he said, because his voice was working even if nothing else was. "The denial was generated by a healthcare resource allocation algorithm," Ava said. "It flagged Sarah's case as low-cost benefit probability. Stage, age, existing treatment burden." Her voice was steady, but her jaw was tight. "The algorithm was called Medicore. It was developed in 2016 and 2017 and licensed to 17 insurance networks." She stopped. "My company built it." The diner noise continued around them. The clatter of silverware, a conversation 2 booths over about a used car, the cook calling an order. Damon sat very still and let the information rearrange itself inside him, the way things do when you already half-suspected something and then someone confirms it and you realize the half-suspicion had been there for a while without your permission. "How long have you known," he said, "that Medicore caused denials since it launched?" Her voice didn't flinch from that. "We knew there would be denials, but that was the function. Cost allocation, resource distribution across large patient pools. We told ourselves it was neutral, mathematical." A muscle in her jaw moved. That it was better than the alternative, which was arbitrary human bias. She looked at her coffee when it arrived, didn't pick it up. That we were doing something efficient, something that would help the system overall. And I found Sarah's file 7 days ago. She said it flatly. Her name was in a class of 1,200 cases that my legal team has been quietly reviewing since a whistleblower filed a complaint in August. 1,200 denials in a 4-year window, categorized by Medicare as statistically low priority. 31 of those patients died within 2 years of the denial. She paused. Sarah was number 14. Damon put the coffee cup down. He didn't say anything for a while. Outside the diner window, a bus went by, and then a kid on a bicycle, and then nothing. Ava Sterling sat across from him and did not try to fill the silence, which was the first thing she'd done that he hadn't expected. She might have died anyway, he said finally. Not a question. Yes, Ava said. Maybe. The trial results were incomplete, but she didn't get to try. She met his eyes. That's not something I get to decide was okay because the math said so. Damon looked at his hands. The coffee was getting cold. He thought about Sarah in the beige office, the oncologist's voice, the word Marinvax, the way Sarah had written it down on a notepad she kept in her purse, because she always wrote things down rather than trusting herself to remember them under stress. He remembered the letter from the insurance company. He remembered reading it twice because the first time it hadn't processed. He remembered Sarah taking it from him gently and setting it on the counter and saying, "Okay, what else do we try?" He remembered what it had felt like to run out of things to try. "You came here to tell me this in person," he said. "Yes." "Why?" "You could have sent a lawyer, filed something, sent a check with a lot of zeros." "Because you saved my life," Ava said, "and I had to look you in the face." She said it without drama, just the plain weight of it. "Because you're a real person, and Sarah was a real person, and I spent too long letting both of you be numbers." Damon looked at her for a long time. She didn't look away. There were shadows under her eyes and something in her expression that he recognized as the specific exhaustion of someone who had been carrying a truth they'd been avoiding and had finally stopped running from it. He didn't forgive her. He wasn't anywhere close to forgiving her. But he also didn't stand up and leave, which surprised him a little. "How many people knew about the denials internally?" he said. "Enough." Her voice was flat again. "More than should have." "And nobody said anything." "They said things," Ava said, "to the legal team, who said things to compliance, who said the exposure was manageable." She looked at him steadily. "I'm the one who let that answer stand. That's on me, not on a committee." He picked up his coffee. It was cold and bad, and he drank it anyway, because it gave him something to do with his hands. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," she said immediately. "That's not true." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't want anything. I came because you deserve to know. Because when I found your name in that file, I had 2 choices. Know and hide it, or know and tell you. And I couldn't—" She stopped, started again. "I couldn't be the kind of person who hides it." "Good for you," Damon said. "Not cruel, just honest. That doesn't help my daughter." "No," Ava said. "It doesn't." The silence that fell between them this time was different from the first one. The first had been shock-shaped, the specific quiet of information hitting. This one was something else, the quiet of 2 people sitting in the remains of a catastrophe, neither of them sure what you were supposed to do next. "I'm working on a response," Ava said finally. "A real one. Not a settlement, not a quiet fund that processes claims in the background. I want to open the records, all of them. I want the 1,200 cases reviewed independently." She paused. "I want Medicare decommissioned." "What does your board say?" Something moved across her face, something wry and tired. "My board is deeply concerned. I'll bet. We're having what you might call vigorous ongoing discussions." Damon looked at her. She looked back. And for a moment, just a moment, he saw past the composure and the precision and the 30-year-old billionaire and saw a woman who was genuinely scared of what she'd built and genuinely more scared of pretending she wasn't. "How did they find you?" he said. "The men in the garage. Was that about Medicare?" Ava's expression shifted slightly. "One of them, the one who was talking. His name is Roy Calder. His son was in the Medicare denial set. 19 years old, denied a treatment authorization for an aggressive lymphoma." Her jaw worked. "He died 9 months ago." Damon said nothing. "Calder found out about the whistleblower complaint through a patient advocacy group, found my schedule through—" She shook her head. "I don't know exactly how. He's not an unintelligent man." She paused. He's a devastated man. There's a difference. I know, Damon said. She looked at him when he said it. Really looked, the way she hadn't quite let herself do yet. I know you do, she said quietly. He didn't tell Lily about the meeting. He wasn't sure how to begin that conversation, and also wasn't sure it was his to have. Not yet. He came home, made pasta, actual pasta, not the linguine, something with sausage and peppers that Lily liked, and sat across from her at the small kitchen table while she talked about a disagreement she'd had with her best friend Priya over whose turn it was to pick the game at recess. And then she said it was definitely her turn because she let me pick last Thursday, Lily said. But I don't think that counts because it rained and we didn't even play. That seems like a reasonable argument, Damon said. That's what I said, but she said a pick is a pick. What did you end up playing? Lily looked momentarily caught. Her thing. So it resolved. It resolved, but I still think I was right. Sometimes both of those things can be true, she poked at her sausage. Did something happen today? You're doing the quiet thing. What quiet thing? The thing where you're quiet, but in a different way than normal quiet. He looked at her. 9 years old, and she cataloged his moods with the precision of someone who'd spent her whole life paying attention to him, who'd had to, maybe, because for a long time he'd been the only constant thing in her world. It was one of the things about single parenthood that nobody warned you about, the way your kids watched you, the way they became tiny experts in your silences. I had a hard conversation today, he said, an honest one. Good hard or bad hard? I don't know yet. Lily nodded, accepting this in the way she accepted most things about him, without pushing, with the particular patience of a kid who'd learned that some things took time to land. Priya's mom said she saw you on the news, she said, returning to her food, like that she thought it might be you, in the parking garage video. Damon was quiet for a beat. What did you say? I said you were a janitor. She looked up at him, completely neutral. Which is true. He held her gaze. Yes, it is. She went back to her food. Dad? Yeah. You don't have to tell me stuff just because I ask, but I want you to know I know things aren't always simple. He set down his fork. When did you get so sharp? Mom was smart, Lily said simply, not sadly, just as a fact she'd made her peace with. Yeah, he said. She was. Roy Calder was released on bail 7 days after the garage incident. Damon found out from Marcus, who'd heard it from a friend at the DA's office, which was the way information traveled in their particular social ecosystem. Not directly, always through 2 or 3 filters. The charge had been reduced from assault with a deadly weapon to criminal threatening plus unlawful restraint, and the bail amount was something Damon's brain processed flatly, without the anger it probably deserved. What he felt instead was something more complicated. He thought about what Ava had told him, Calder's son, 19 years old, lymphoma, denial letter. Thought about Roy Calder standing in a parking garage telling a billionaire. You people don't get to just walk away, and understood, on a cellular level, where that sentence came from. He didn't agree with what Calder had done. He would have done it again, stopped it again, because there was no version of himself that stood still while anyone was being threatened. But he understood the grief that had metastasized into rage and aimed itself at the one visible target. He'd felt something like it himself once. In the months after the denial letter, after the treatment timeline compressed and the options narrowed and finally ran out. He'd felt it in the direction of the insurance company, the algorithm, the nameless, faceless system that had looked at Sarah Cross and seen a probability rather than a woman who made him laugh at his own worst moods, and who cried at wildlife documentaries, and who had held his hand in a military hospital when his shoulder was in pieces and told him it was going to be fine in a voice so certain he'd believed her. He'd never aimed that grief at a specific person, partly because he didn't know who to aim it at, partly because he had Lily, and Lily needed him to come home every night instead of becoming something that scared her. But he understood Roy Calder. That was the uncomfortable truth he sat with on the couch. Thursday night, after Lily was asleep, the TV off, the apartment quiet around him. Understanding wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't agreement. It was just the thing you were left with when you knew grief well enough to recognize it, wearing someone else's face. Ava called him on Friday afternoon. He almost let it go to voicemail. Then he didn't. Something happened, she said, before he could speak. He was on his lunch break, sitting on the loading dock behind the school, the October air cold enough now that his breath showed. Tell me. Calder's out on bail. You probably know that. I heard. My security team intercepted a communication this morning. He's been in contact with two men we don't recognize, different from the ones in the garage. The language is... A pause. It's not about me this time. Damon went still. What do you mean? The communication mentioned a janitor, Ava said. Her voice was careful in the way of someone who understood what they were about to say was going to land hard and was trying to deliver it cleanly anyway. And a little girl. The loading dock was cold and quiet, and he could hear the kitchen staff talking behind the closed door, and somewhere down the block a car alarm cycling through its tones. He stayed very still inside all of that and let the information settle where it needed to settle. You're sure, he said. I'm sure. He stood up. I need to call you back. Damon? 10 minutes, he said. Don't go anywhere alone until I call you back. He hung up and stood on the loading dock for exactly 30 seconds. Not thinking, just letting his body run the calculation that his mind already knew the answer to. Then he went inside, told Larry he had a family emergency, and walked the 6 blocks to Jefferson Elementary in 4 minutes, at a pace that was not quite running. Lily was in her classroom. He could see her through the window in the door, sitting at the second desk from the left, frowning at a worksheet with the concentrated effort she brought to math. She was fine. She was completely fine. He stood in the hallway and let out a breath that had been in his lungs since the loading dock. Then he called Ava back. I need to know everything you know about these men, he said. Names, descriptions, location data, if you have it. My security team is already working on it. Your security team isn't enough. A pause. I know, she said. Then, I'm sorry that I brought this to your door. You didn't... Don't, he said. Damon, you don't get to apologize for this one yet. Right now I need information, not an apology. His voice came out harder than he'd intended. He pulled it back slightly. Just tell me what you have, she told him. He listened, standing in the hallway of an elementary school with his daughter, 20 feet away. The familiar institutional smell of wax and whiteboard markers around him. His mind doing something it hadn't done in 4 years. Pulling up maps and threat assessments and contingency routes. The old machinery starting up again with the specific reluctance of an engine that had been left idle too long. It was the sound of himself becoming someone he'd tried very hard to stop being. He didn't like it. He also didn't have a choice. After he hung up, he waited in the hallway until the end of the school day, and when Lily came out of her classroom with her backpack and her frown already fading into the afternoon, he was right there. You're early, she said. Decided to walk you home today. She looked at him the way she always did when something wasn't adding up. Why? He reached out and she took his hand, automatic, without thinking, the gesture of a kid who still trusted him completely, and he felt the weight of that trust sitting square in the center of his chest. I just wanted to, he said. She let it go. They walked home through the cold October afternoon, his daughter talking about the math worksheet and the injustice of long division, and Damon Cross walked beside her with his eyes moving across every doorway and side street and parked car on the route. The habits of a former life returned to him fully and completely, like they'd never left at all. He hadn't asked for any of this. He hadn't wanted it. He had wanted a quiet life and a cracked mop handle and bad coffee at the Colfax Diner on Thursdays. He had wanted his daughter to grow up in a world that didn't require him to be dangerous on her behalf. But wanting something and getting it had always been two separate conversations, and Damon had learned a long time ago that life didn't negotiate. The next 72 hours, Damon moved through his ordinary life with extraordinary attention. He walked Lily to school and walked her home. He took different routes each time, not obviously different, not the kind of variation that would alarm her, just enough to break any pattern someone might be building. He started parking Elena's borrowed car in 2 different locations on the block. He mapped the sightlines from the apartment windows without moving the curtains. He did all of this quietly, the way he did most things, while continuing to mop floors and sign maintenance forms and eat lunch on the loading dock. And if any of his coworkers noticed something different about him, they didn't say so, because Damon Cross had always been the kind of man people found slightly difficult to read. He called Ava every evening, not because he decided to trust her. Trust was a structure that took time to build, and they didn't have enough time yet, but because she had better information access than he did, and information was the thing that kept Lily safe. On the third evening, she told him her security team had identified one of the two men from the intercepted communication. His name was Terry Grouse, former bail bondsman, 2 assault priors, currently working freelance. Working freelance was the phrasing Ava's head of security had used, and Damon understood what it meant without needing further translation. "Where is he now?" Damon said. "Denver." A pause. "Checked into a motel on Alameda 2 days ago." He was quiet for a moment. "You should have led with that." "I found out an hour ago." "Ava." He kept his voice level. "Information like that comes first, not third, not after you tell me about your board meeting." "You're right. No defensiveness in it, just acknowledgement." "I'm sorry. I'm still learning how this works." "What did your security team recommend?" "Notify DCPD, file a report based on the communication intercept." "Have you done that?" "My legal team is reviewing the communication first, to determine what can be disclosed without—" "Ava." "I know," she said. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like a company protecting itself." The silence on the line had a particular quality. Not offended, not defensive, more like someone looking at a version of themselves they'd been trying not to look at. "I'm calling the detective on the original garage case in the morning," she said. "Everything goes to him, unfiltered." "Good." Another pause. "Damon, I want to move you and Lily somewhere safe while this is being resolved. I have a property outside." "No, it's not. I don't run," he said. "And I don't take my daughter out of her school and away from everything she knows because someone sent a threatening message. That's not how I operate." "How do you operate?" He looked out the kitchen window at the streetlight, which the city had finally fixed 2 days ago. "I stay visible where it's expected. I control the terrain I know. And I make sure the people coming at me don't get to choose the time and place." A long pause. "That sounds like military thinking." "It is." "Does it work in civilian life?" "So far," he said. And then, because it was true, and because he was too tired for anything else, "Get some sleep. You sound worse than yesterday." "I'm fine." "You're not. But that's your business." He paused. "Call the detective first thing." "First thing," she said. He hung up and stood in the kitchen and thought about Roy Calder, and about the grief that had turned into a plan, and about the particular cruelty of a world where 2 devastated men could end up on opposite sides of the same catastrophe without either of them having wanted to be there. He went to see her in San Francisco on a Thursday. Not because she asked him to, she had been careful not to pressure him into anything since the diner conversation. He went because she'd called on Wednesday to tell him she was ready to make the internal disclosure to her board, that she intended to present the full Medicore findings herself rather than let the legal team manage the framing, and something in the way she described it, the flatness, the specific exhaustion of someone bracing for impact, made him think she needed to say it to a face rather than a phone. He arranged for Elena to take Lily for 2 nights, told her it was work-related, which Elena accepted without comment, because Elena was perceptive and kind, and had learned over 3 years of living upstairs that Damon Cross rarely explained himself in more words than necessary. He took the early flight and got a cab from SFO and arrived at Sterling AI's headquarters on Market Street at 10 in the morning. The building was newer than he'd expected, glass and clean lines, the architecture of an industry that still believed its own story. A woman at the front desk gave him a badge and walked him to an elevator that opened directly into a conference room on the 14th floor, and Ava was already there, standing at the window with her back to the door, looking out at the bay. She turned when he came in. She was wearing the same kind of controlled professional presentation he'd seen in photographs, dark blazer, hair back, but her eyes were different from the diner, sharper and more tired, and something in them that had moved slightly closer to the surface than she usually allowed. "You came," she said. "You sounded like you needed someone in the room who wasn't on your payroll." Something crossed her face, not quite a smile, but close. "That's accurate." She gestured toward the table. "The board meeting is at 2. I have the full findings." She paused. 1,214 cases, 31 deaths, 4 years of documented internal concern that went unacted on. Her voice stayed even through all of it, which he was beginning to understand was how she handled things that were too large to absorb at normal volume. My legal team's best current estimate of liability exposure is somewhere between $6 and $900 million. Damon sat down. What does that do to the company? Depends on how it's handled. She sat across from him, same position as the diner. If we fight it, deny, delay, settle quietly, the company probably survives. Stock takes a hit, recovers eventually. This kind of thing gets managed all the time. She said it without bitterness, just as a fact about the world she'd been operating in. If I do what I want to do, which is open everything, admit everything, decommission Medicor publicly, and create a compensation structure with real teeth, the company loses roughly 60% of its current valuation, immediately, maybe more. What does your board want? What do you think? Manage it. Manage it, she confirmed. Two of them used the phrase strategic disclosure, which is the corporate language for admitting as little as possible in the way that creates the smallest legal surface area. And you're going to tell them no. She looked at him. I'm going to tell them no. He was quiet for a moment. Why are you telling me this before you tell them? Because... She stopped, started again, more carefully. Because you're the one person in this situation who has standing to tell me I'm wrong. If you thought I should manage it, if you thought a quiet settlement was better for the families than a public fight, I'd want to hear that from you before I walked into that room. She held his eyes. You have standing, Damon. Real standing. Sarah was number 14. He sat with that for a while. Outside the conference room windows, the bay was gray and flat under October clouds, a container ship moving slowly in the middle distance. He thought about Sarah's handwriting on the notepad. He thought about Lily's face on the first morning after the funeral, the particular confusion of a 5-year-old who understood that something was permanently different, but not yet the full shape of it. Manage it, and 1,200 families get a check and a non-disclosure, he said. Go public, and they get a record, an admission, a reason. Yes. Sarah wouldn't have wanted a check and a non-disclosure. Ava was very still. She'd have wanted the record, Damon said. She was a teacher. She cared a lot about what you called things. He looked out the window. She would have said that calling something a settlement when it's actually a cover-up was a way of making people invisible twice. Ava said nothing for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than usual. She sounds like someone I would have wanted to know. You would have liked her, Damon said. She wouldn't have liked you at first. She had strong opinions about tech companies. He paused. She would have come around. She always did, with people who were willing to be honest about what they'd gotten wrong. Something in Ava's face shifted, opened slightly. It happened quickly, and then she pulled it back, not out of coldness, but out of the particular self-protection of someone who'd learned to keep the moving parts of herself internal. Okay, she said. Okay? I'm going to tell them everything. She straightened slightly. I wanted to hear you say she deserved the record. She did. I know. She looked at her hands on the table. I've known for a while. I just needed someone to say it who was allowed to. He didn't sit in on the board meeting. He waited in a smaller room down the hall with bad coffee and a view of an interior courtyard. And at 4:17 in the afternoon, Ava came out and sat down across from him and said, 3 of the 7 want to remove me as CEO. What do the other 4 want? 2 are waiting to see what the legal exposure looks like after a formal audit. 1 is in shock. 1, she exhaled. 1 said she'd been waiting for this conversation for 2 years. That's someone who knew. Someone who had concerns that got managed. Ava's jaw tightened briefly. We'll be having a separate conversation about that. What happens now? I retain control for the moment. I've committed to a full independent audit, which the board can't block without triggering other issues. She looked tired in a way that wasn't just the meeting. Medicor gets suspended pending the audit. That was non-negotiable on my end. They accepted it because the alternative is messier. She paused. The public disclosure is next. That part they can't stop either, once the audit is underway. Federal regulators have to be notified. Damon looked at her. You ready for that? No, she said immediately. But ready isn't the standard. The standard is whether it's right. She picked up her coffee, realized it was the same terrible temperature as his, set it back down. I keep thinking about something you said at the diner, about Calder, that you understood where the sentence came from. Yeah. I want to understand that, not as a PR position, not because it's strategically useful to appear empathetic during a corporate crisis. She looked at him directly. I want to actually understand it. What it feels like to be Roy Calder, standing in a parking garage, deciding that was the only move left. You want to understand a man who grabbed you by the arm and had a pipe. I want to understand what made him that, she said. There's a difference. Damon considered this. It's not complicated, really. It's just grief that ran out of legitimate targets. You spend long enough trying to fight a system, and eventually the system is too big and too diffuse to fight, so you look for the one face you can put on it. He set his cup down. Your face is pretty visible. I know. He was wrong to do what he did. That's not a complicated statement either, but wrong and understandable aren't mutually exclusive. Ava was quiet, absorbing this. Do you think he'll stop, now that there's a formal process moving? Depends on whether he believes in formal processes, Damon said. Men like Calder, after what they've been through, they don't always have a lot of faith left in systems doing the right thing. I can try to reach him, directly, through his attorney. That might help? He paused. It might not. Don't do it because you think it'll make him go away. Do it because his son deserved to be seen as more than a case number. She nodded slowly. His son's name was Marcus Calder, 19. Pre-med. She said it like she'd been carrying it. He wanted to be a pediatric surgeon. Damon said nothing. There was nothing useful to add to that, and he'd learned a long time ago that sometimes the right response to something terrible was just to let it be terrible without trying to frame it into something more bearable. They sat in the small room with the bad coffee, and outside the courtyard was getting dark, and after a while Ava said, "Thank you for coming. Don't thank me yet. You still have the hard part ahead." I know. She looked at him. Why did you come, really? You could have just taken my calls. He thought about it honestly, the way he always tried to. Because I needed to see if you'd actually do it. Walk into that room and say it out loud. And you did. He stood up. That doesn't fix anything. It doesn't bring Sarah back, and it doesn't give Roy Calder his son. But it's the beginning of something real instead of something managed. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. That matters. She stood too. I'm going to need... She stopped, started differently. This process is going to get ugly. The board, the media, federal investigators. It's going to be a long time before it resembles anything clean. Things that matter usually are. Will you... She stopped again. He could see her deciding whether to ask. I don't have a right to ask you for anything. I want to be clear about that. You don't owe me anything. Ask, he said. Will you stay involved? Not as a legal witness, not as a... I just mean, as someone who tells me when I'm getting it wrong. She said it without pretense. Because I will get it wrong. I know how I operate. I go fast and I trust data over instinct, and I miss things that are right in front of me. I missed 1,200 things for 4 years. Her voice didn't break on it, but it came close. I need someone who's not afraid to tell me when I'm becoming the problem again. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back, not pleading, not performing, just asking, the way you asked something from someone when you had no leverage and no entitlement, and just the plain need of it. I'll think about it, he said. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no, and she understood the difference. I was back in Denver by 10 that night, came in through Elena's upstairs, and picked up Lily, who was half asleep on Elena's couch, and wrapped herself around him in the instinctive way she had when she was tired, her arms around his neck, her face against his shoulder. How was she? He asked Elena quietly. Perfect, Elena said. She helped me make soup. She's a better cook than you. Everyone's a better cook than me. You should let her practice more. He carried Lily down the stairs and through their apartment door, and got her into bed without fully waking her, pulled the blanket up, sat on the edge of the mattress for a moment in the dark. She smelled like Elena's soap, and something that was just her, the specific warmth of his daughter, unchanged since she was an infant, the one constant in 4 years of everything else shifting. He sat with it for a moment, the weight of the day pressing down and the particular relief of this moment holding it back. He was almost to the door when she spoke, quiet and not quite awake. Dad? Right here. Did the hard thing get less hard? He turned back. She was looking at him through the dark with the unfocused gaze of someone balanced between sleep and consciousness. Getting there, he said. Okay. She was already drifting. Good. He closed the door quietly. Bote. Roy Calder's second move came 6 days later, and it came faster than Damon had expected, which meant either Calder was less patient than he'd calculated, or someone had given him a reason to accelerate. He found out about it the way he'd been finding out about most things. From Ava, at 7 in the morning, his phone buzzing on the nightstand before his alarm. Terry Grouse rented a car yesterday, she said. Cash. It's on a street 2 blocks from Jefferson Elementary. Damon was already sitting up. How long ago did you find this out? 20 minutes. I called you the moment I... Where's your head of security? On the line with DCPD right now. He was already out of bed and moving toward the hallway. Lily's door was still closed. He pushed it open. She was asleep, tangled in her blanket the way she always was, her hair everywhere, completely fine. He pulled the door half shut and went to the kitchen window, looking out at the street below. The morning was gray, early light, 2 people walking dogs on opposite ends of the block. A delivery truck idling on the corner. Nothing that looked wrong, which meant nothing, because things that looked wrong usually weren't, and things that were wrong usually looked like everything else. I'm keeping her home today, he said into the phone. Agreed. My security team can have someone, no outside people near my daughter, he said. That's a hard line. A pause. Damon, you can't manage this alone. I'm not alone, I have Marcus. He was already pulling up the contact on his other hand. And I know the terrain and Grouse doesn't. That matters more than numbers. What can I do, she said, and there was nothing performative in it. Just the genuine helpless question of someone who understood that in this particular moment, $4 billion was worth almost nothing. Keep feeding me information, and stay inside today. I have a board call at... Inside, he said. Remote. Another pause. Okay. He called Marcus, who picked up on the first ring because Marcus always picked up on the first ring, a habit from 30 years of firefighting where the phone that rang before dawn was never about something good. I need you, Damon said. Tell me where, Marcus said, without asking why, which was the whole reason Damon had called him first. He told him. Then he went and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with his phone and the street view on his laptop and the specific narrow focus that settled over him in moments like this. Not calm exactly, more like the opposite of scattered. Everything unnecessary falling away. The grief and the complication and the impossible question of what Ava Sterling meant to him and what he meant to this whole unraveling situation. All of it moving to the perimeter, leaving just the terrain and the threat and the variables he could control. Lily came out of her bedroom at 7:30 in her pajamas, hair a disaster, squinting at him the way she did before she'd been awake long enough to assemble her face. Why aren't you at work? She said. Took the day. She got herself a glass of water from the sink and drank half of it standing there. I have school. You're staying home today. She put the glass down and looked at him, and he could see her running through what she knew, which was more than he told her, and less than the whole picture. Is it the parking garage thing? She said. He'd underestimated her. He did it periodically, forgot that she was 9 going on something much older, and each time he forgot, she reminded him. There are some people I need to deal with, he said. It's not dangerous for you at home. But it's not safe at school. Safer here today. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. Her hair was still a disaster. She looked so much like Sarah when she was thinking hard that it cost him something every time. Are you going to be okay? She said. Yes. That was fast. I know what I'm doing, Lil. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then, can I have the iPad for a school day if it's technically not a school day? Yes. And cereal instead of eggs? Yes. Okay, she said, and went to get the cereal. And Damon sat at the kitchen table and watched his daughter pour milk over her cereal and felt the particular sharpness of loving someone that much in a moment that required him to be completely clear-headed, the way it both helped and cost him at the same time. Marcus arrived at 8. He was a large man, gray-bearded, with the patient economy of someone who had spent decades managing emergencies without panicking, and he came in through the back entrance with 2 coffees from the place on 14th and sat down at the kitchen table and listened while Damon told him everything. Not just Grouse in the car. All of it. Ava, Medicor, the diner conversation, Sarah's file. When Damon finished, Marcus was quiet for a while. Then he said, "You've been carrying this for 2 weeks." "Yes." "By yourself?" "Mostly." Marcus looked at his coffee. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" "I didn't know what to do with it yet." "You don't have to know what to do with it to tell someone," Marcus said. Not accusatory, just honest, the way Marcus was always just honest. "I know," Damon said. "I'm telling you now." Marcus nodded slowly. "Sarah's treatment. You really think the algorithm? The company thinks it. Ava told me herself." Damon looked at his hands on the table. She didn't know Sarah specifically, but she knew the system did this. She knew, and she let the legal team manage it. Marcus sat with that. "And now?" "Now she's blowing it up. Publicly. All of it." Damon paused. "I think she means it." "You believe her?" "I believe she's doing it. Believing why she's doing it, that's more complicated." Marcus looked at him, the long, level look of a man who had known him for 4 years and understood the specific way Damon Cross arrived at conclusions. "What do you need from me today?" "Eyes on the street, second set. I'll cover the school route, you cover the apartment perimeter." "And if Grouse shows?" "He doesn't get near the building," Damon said. "That's the only objective." Marcus nodded. "And you?" "I stay here until we know where he is. Then we go to him instead of waiting for him to come to us." "That's very military of you." "It's very effective is what it is." Marcus picked up his coffee. "Okay," he said. "I'm in." Grouse made his move at 11:40 in the morning, which was when Damon had walked 3 blocks to the corner store for Lily's lunch supplies. Not because he'd stopped being careful, but because he'd been watching the rental car via the feed from a traffic camera Ava's security team had accessed, and the car hadn't moved all morning, and that had made him briefly a fraction of a degree less focused than he should have been. He knew it the second he came back around the corner and saw a man standing at the entrance of his building who hadn't been there 11 minutes ago. Medium height, thick through the shoulders, the specific stillness of someone trying to look like they had a reason to be somewhere they didn't have a reason to be. Damon stopped walking. Grouse hadn't seen him yet. He was facing the building entrance, watching the door, which meant he wasn't here to grab Lily. He was here to watch, to confirm address, routine, access points, preparation, not action. That was useful information. Damon circled the block and came up behind him from the south, and he was 6 feet away before Grouse registered his presence and turned, and by then the geometry of the situation had already resolved itself in Damon's favor, which was where he needed it to be. "Building's occupied," Damon said. "You're going to want to move along." Grouse looked at him. Then his eyes moved to the grocery bag in Damon's left hand, to his right hand, which was loose at his side, and Damon could see the calculation happening. How much trouble? What kind? What's the cost-benefit here? Which was fitting, in a darkly appropriate way. "You're not," Damon said. "You rented a car on cash yesterday. You've been parked on Elm for 18 hours. You're working for a man who is currently on bail for threatening a woman and her associates." He took 1 step forward, not aggressive, just closing the distance enough that the conversation became private. "And you're standing outside the apartment building where my 9-year-old daughter lives." Grouse had gone very still. "Here's what happens now," Damon said. "You call Roy Calder and you tell him this address is a closed door. You tell him the person who lives here is not his target, was never his target, and if that address comes up in any future conversation between the two of you, the police, who are already aware of your rental car and your location, will get a call within the hour." Man's eyes. "Tell him to put his grief somewhere that doesn't end with him in a cell and his son unmemorialized and forgotten. Tell him there's a process underway that will do more for his son's memory than anything he's planning." Grouse stared at him for a long moment. Whatever he'd been expecting, this wasn't it. "Who are you?" he said quietly. "Someone who understands where he's coming from," Damon said, "and someone who will not let him put a child in the middle of it." Another long moment. Then Grouse looked away. A specific kind of looking away. Not evasive, but more like someone standing down from something they'd half committed to. And he walked past Damon and down the block and didn't look back. Damon stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the grocery bag in his hand, the October air cold against his face, his heartbeat settling from the elevated place it had been. He called Ava. "Grouse just left the building," he said. "He's going to make a call." A pause. "And Calder?" "I don't know yet. But we bought time. He looked up at the building, at the window of their apartment on the third floor. How's the board call going? It's ongoing. Her voice carried the specific strain of a simultaneous crisis. Damon, I want to say something. Say it. I'm glad you're still alive. A pause. I know that's a strange thing to say. I've been thinking about the fact that you walked into that garage for me, and now you're standing outside your building protecting your daughter from consequences of the same situation, and I'm just glad you're okay. He looked at the window for another moment. So am I, he said, and meant it without knowing all the reasons why. He went upstairs and unlocked the apartment door, and Lily was on the couch with the iPad, and when she looked up, he gave her the most ordinary version of his face, the one that said nothing unusual had happened, the one he'd gotten very good at. And she looked at him for exactly 2 seconds with those eyes that cataloged everything. Cereal was good, she said. I got the stuff for grilled cheese, he said, holding up the bag. Her face did the thing it always did, the instantaneous, unfiltered smile. You're forgiven, she said. He went into the kitchen and started making lunch, and for a few minutes the apartment was full of the ordinary sounds of a Thursday, the tap running, the bread bag rustling, Lily's show playing quietly from the living room. And Damon stood at the counter and felt the weight of the last 2 weeks pressing through him like weather, not going away but changing shape, the way things did when you'd moved through the worst of them and hadn't lost what mattered most. He didn't know what was coming next. I didn't know what Roy Calder would decide, or what Ava's board would do, or what the federal investigators would find, or what he himself would do with all the things that were becoming true about his life, and the woman who had inadvertently altered it twice. He didn't have answers for any of that. What he had was grilled cheese and his daughter in the next room, and for today, that was enough of a foundation to stand on. Roy Calder called his attorney the same evening. Grouse left Damon's block. Damon found out about it 3 days later, not from Ava's security team, but from the detective handling the garage case. A compact, watchful woman named Reyes, who had been professionally patient with Damon's refusal to confirm his identity for 2 weeks, and had finally stopped waiting. She called him directly, using a number she'd obtained through channels she didn't explain, and said, Mr. Cross, I think we should probably talk in person now. They met at a coffee shop on Broadway. Reyes was younger than her voice suggested, mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, the specific economy of movement that came from years of reading rooms before entering them. She didn't waste time. Calder contacted us through his attorney yesterday, she said. He wants to cooperate with the Medicor investigation, formally, in exchange for the DA's office considering his cooperation when they review the garage charges. Damon looked at his coffee. His attorney told him about the federal angle. His attorney is smart, Reyes said. Calder is also smart, underneath the grief. He understands that what Sterling AI is about to do publicly changes the terrain considerably. She paused. It also helps that someone apparently had a conversation with the man he hired, and that man apparently communicated to Calder that the person he was targeting was not who he thought he was. Damon said nothing. Reyes looked at him steadily. I've seen the security footage from your building's entrance camera, 11:43, 3 days ago. She held his gaze. Whatever was said in that conversation, it worked. Grouse checked out of the Alameda Motel the same afternoon and drove his rental car back to the agency. A beat. I'm not asking you to characterize the conversation. Good, Damon said. I am asking you to come in and give a formal statement about the garage incident. We've been patient on that front, but the Calder Cooperation Agreement is going to move quickly once it's formalized, and your account becomes part of the record. Will it be used in a way that makes Calder's situation worse? Reyes looked at him without surprise, which meant she'd anticipated the question. The DA's position is that Calder's grief is a mitigating circumstance. Nobody in that office is looking to make an example of a father whose son died at 19. She paused. Your statement will help establish the facts of the garage incident. It won't determine what happens to Calder. That's a separate decision already in motion. Damon sat with it. He thought about Roy Calder's son, 19 years old, pre-med, who had wanted to be a pediatric surgeon. He thought about the parking garage and the thing Calder had said, "You people don't get to just walk away," and the raw, specific truth in it, the grief that had calcified into a plan because plans gave grief somewhere to go. I'll come in, he said. End of the week. Reyes nodded, She started to stand, then paused. One other thing. The media situation around Sterling AI is going to escalate significantly in the next 10 days. When it does, the garage footage is going to resurface prominently. She looked at him. Your name will likely come out. Not from us. But it will come out. I know, Damon said. I wanted to give you time to prepare for that. I appreciate it. She left. Damon sat with his coffee for a while longer, watching the street through the window, thinking about the particular irony of a life that had been built on invisibility, now becoming impossible to keep invisible. He'd have to tell Lily before it happened. That was the first thing. Everything else could wait. He told her on a Friday evening after dinner when she was doing homework at the kitchen table and he was washing dishes at the sink. He'd been trying to figure out the right way to begin the conversation for 3 days. And then he decided there wasn't a right way, and he should just begin it. Remember Priya's mom, he said, who thought she saw me on the news. Lily looked up from her homework. Yeah, she was right. His daughter set down her pencil. She did it slowly, with a carefulness that told him she'd been waiting for this conversation too. The parking garage. Yes. You said someone needed help. 3 men had a woman cornered. I helped her. He turned off the tap and turned around. The woman is named Ava Sterling. She runs a technology company in San Francisco. Lily was watching him with the focused attention she brought to things that mattered to her. Why didn't you tell me before? I was trying to figure out how much of it to tell you. All of it, she said without hesitation. Always all of it, Dad. He sat down across from her. He told her, not everything. Not the details about Grouse and the rental car and the building entrance, but the architecture of it. Ava's company. The algorithm. Sarah's file. The way 2 people had ended up connected to each other through the worst thing that had happened to their family. Lily listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. So her company's the reason Mom didn't get the medicine, she said. The company built the system that said no, Damon said carefully. Whether it would have made a difference, we don't know for certain. The doctors thought it would help. But we don't know. No. Lily looked at her homework. A math worksheet, multiplication. The long division injustice was apparently still ongoing. She looked at it without seeing it. Are you angry at her? I was. What are you now? He thought about it honestly. I don't know what to call it. She's doing the right thing now. That matters. It doesn't cancel the other thing, but it matters. Do you like her? Lily, that's a normal question, she said. It's complicated. Everything's complicated, she said, in a tone that sounded so much like something Sarah would have said that he had to look at the table for a moment. You can like someone and be angry at them. That's not weird. No, he said. It's not. She picked up her pencil again, then put it back down. Her company made the thing that said no to Mom. And now her company is going to say sorry to everyone it said no to. She worked through it out loud, which was how she processed things. Externally, sequentially, following the logic to where it landed. And you helped her even when you were angry. I didn't know who she was when I helped her. But you would have anyway, Lily said. Not a question. He didn't answer it directly. He didn't need to because she was right, and they both knew it. Is she nice? Lily asked. She's honest, he said. She's difficult and smart, and she doesn't always say things the right way, but she means them. He paused. She's doing something very hard right now because it's the right thing to do, even though it's going to cost her a lot. Lily considered this. That's kind of what you do, she said. He looked at her. Walk into parking garages, she said, when it's going to cost you a lot. He sat across from his daughter and felt something move through him that he didn't try to name, just let it pass through and settle. Your mom would have had strong opinions about all of this, he said. I know. Lily almost smiled. She would have been furious about the algorithm part, and then eventually she would have decided what mattered was what happened next. She picked up her pencil for real this time. She always cared more about what happened next. Yeah, Damon said. She did. He got up and went back to the dishes, and Lily went back to her homework, and the kitchen was quiet except for the water and the scratch of pencil on paper, and he thought that Sarah would have recognized this moment, the ordinary texture of it, the way the hardest conversations could happen in the middle of the most unremarkable evenings,
and somehow that was the right way for them to happen.
Ava made the announcement on a Tuesday morning, not a press release, not a statement through her communications team. She scheduled a live address, broadcast through the company's own platform, and picked up immediately by every major network and streaming service. And she stood at a podium in Sterling AI's main conference room with no teleprompter and no prepared remarks beyond a single handwritten page of notes. And she talked for 41 minutes. Damon watched it on his phone from the school's break room, sitting at the corner table with the volume low. Larry from facilities eating a sandwich 3 feet away and completely unaware that the woman on the screen had any connection to the man sitting next to him. Ava stood at the podium in a plain dark jacket, and she did not start with context or history or the company's mission statement. She started with Medicor. She said the word clearly, without hedging, and then she said, "Between 2018 and 2022, the algorithm my company built and licensed to 17 insurance networks generated 1,214 treatment authorization denials that our internal audit has now classified as medically unjustifiable by human review standards. 31 of those patients died within 2 years of their denial." A pause. I want to say that again. 31 people, not 31 cases. 31 human beings with families and names and futures that were abbreviated, at least in part because of a system I approved. She didn't cry. Her voice stayed level throughout, which struck Damon as neither coldness nor performance, but as a deliberate choice. The decision that these families deserved accuracy more than they deserved to watch her fall apart. She announced Medicor's permanent decommissioning. She announced the independent audit's full public release, including internal communications. She announced a $200 million compensation foundation, not a settlement fund requiring signatures and non-disclosures, but a foundation with an independent board and a public charter, and no requirement that recipients waive any legal rights. She announced that Sterling AI was voluntarily submitting all relevant records to the Federal Trade Commission, the Department of Health and Human Services, and the Senate Commerce Committee. Then she said, "I want to be direct about something. I have been asked by my legal team, my board, and people who care about this company to frame what we're doing today as a proactive correction, as evidence that self-regulation in the technology sector can work. I'm not going to do that. What happened was not a failure of regulation. It was a failure of conscience. Mine specifically. I knew this system was denying human beings access to care. I allowed the conversation about that to live in legal memos and compliance meetings instead of bringing it into the open where it belonged. There is no framing that makes that acceptable, and I'm not going to insult the families involved by looking for one." Larry from facilities had stopped eating his sandwich. He was looking at the phone screen from across the table. "Isn't that the parking garage lady?" he said. "Yeah," Damon said. "She's something else," Larry said, with a kind of simple, genuine admiration that didn't require any further context. "Yeah," Damon said again. "She is." The calls started coming in to Ava's communications team within hours and did not stop. Media requests, legal inquiries, messages from the families of the 1,214, statements from members of Congress, a response from the FTC that was uncharacteristically swift, and from 3 of the 17 insurance networks that had licensed Medicor, 2 threatening litigation and 1 requesting an urgent meeting to discuss proactive cooperation, which Ava's attorney described as the corporate equivalent of a man who helped you rob a bank, suddenly very interested in talking to the police before you did. Damon watched the coverage from a distance, the way you watched weather from inside a building, aware of the scale of it, insulated from the worst of it, but knowing the insulation wasn't permanent. His name came out on Thursday. Not from Detective Reyes's office, which had been careful. From a tech reporter in San Francisco who had been working the Sterling AI story since the garage footage first surfaced and had connected the threads. The sealed military file, the Denver janitor, the wife in the Medicor denial set, and published a piece that was careful enough not to be irresponsible but thorough enough to be devastating in its specificity. The Man in the Garage, How Damon Cross Saved the CEO, whose company may have contributed to his wife's death. By Friday morning, it had 3 million reads. His phone started ringing from numbers he didn't recognize. He turned it off and used Ava's direct line only. The principal at Jefferson Elementary called him in to ask, gently and with obvious discomfort, whether the attention was going to create challenges for the school environment. He told her probably yes, in the short term, and they discussed whether Lily should take 2 weeks of remote learning, which Lily later described as the worst idea she'd ever heard, and which Damon ultimately agreed with, because pulling her from her routine would signal to her that something was wrong in a way that would do more damage than the temporary disruption of camera crews on the sidewalk. Marcus came over Saturday morning and sat at the kitchen table and read the article on his phone while Damon made eggs. "This is accurate," Marcus said when he finished. "Mostly. The part about Sarah's file." "Yes." Marcus set the phone down. He looked at his hands on the table, then at Damon at the stove. "You've known this for 3 weeks." "Yes." "And you didn't—" Marcus stopped, shook his head, not angry, something more complicated than angry. "I would have wanted to know, Damon." "I know," Damon said. "I'm sorry." "I'm not saying it to—" Marcus exhaled. "I went to her funeral. I sat with you in that hospital the last week." His voice had gotten rough. "She mattered to me, too." Damon turned off the burner and turned around. "I know she did." "So next time something like this, there's not going to be a next time something like this. You know what I mean?" "I know what you mean." He brought the eggs to the table. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I handled it alone because that's how I handle things, and that's not always the right call." Marcus looked at him for a moment, then picked up his fork. "The CEO, Ava Sterling. What about her?" "The article makes it sound like she's doing the right thing." "She is. How do you feel about that?" Damon sat down across from him. "I feel like it's the right thing," he said carefully. "That's not what I asked." He looked at his plate. "I feel like it's complicated," he said, "and I'm not in a place where I can sort out all the things it is." He looked up. "Does that answer it?" "Closer," Marcus said, and dropped it, because Marcus always knew when to drop it. Senator Patricia Wynne of the Commerce Committee requested Damon's testimony before the subcommittee on AI and healthcare ethics, and the request came through Ava's attorney because that was the only channel anyone could reliably reach him through anymore. Damon read the formal letter twice, then called Ava. "You don't have to do this," she said immediately. "I want to be clear about that. Your involvement in this is already beyond anything anyone could reasonably expect." "What happens if I don't?" he said. A pause. "The subcommittee still hears testimony. From me, from the audit team, from affected families who've agreed to participate. It's still significant." "And if I do?" "Then the story stops being abstract," she said. "A former Navy SEAL, a janitor, a widowed father who had direct personal experience with Medicor and then saved the life of the CEO responsible. That is not a story that allows anyone in that room to look away." Another pause. "But Damon, that's a reason for me to want you there. It's not a reason for you to go." He thought about Lily saying she always cared more about what happened next. "When?" he said. 3 weeks. Washington. "I'll need to arrange for Lily." "I'll arrange whatever you need," Ava said immediately. "Flights, hotel, childcare if you want it, anything. Whatever makes it possible." "Elena can take her," he said. "I don't need your logistics." "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." He was about to hang up when she spoke again, and her voice had shifted slightly, come down from the professional register to something less managed. "Damon, this is going to be difficult. Testifying, saying Sarah's name in a hearing room in front of cameras." A pause. "I want you to know that you don't have to protect me in there. You don't have to be fair to me or balanced or generous. You can say exactly what this cost you, all of it, without softening any of it for my sake." He was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. "I mean it." "I know you mean it." He paused. "That's actually why I'm going." The Senate hearing was on a Wednesday in November, 3 weeks later, in a wood-paneled room that smelled like old carpet and institutional coffee. Damon sat in the gallery while Ava testified first, which took 2 hours and was the most thorough public accounting he'd ever watched a corporate executive give, not because she was a skilled communicator, which she was, but because she kept refusing the exits the senators kept inadvertently offering her. Senator Morrison from Ohio, well-meaning and slightly too impressed by his own gravitas, asked whether she believed a more robust federal regulatory framework could have prevented Medicor's failures, which was an invitation to redirect responsibility outward, to the government, to the absence of oversight. Ava looked at him politely and said, I think regulation might have accelerated disclosure, but the failure was not regulatory. I had internal reports identifying the harm Medicor was causing as early as 2020. I chose not to act on them adequately. A regulation can't fix a decision I made. Morrison blinked and moved on. Senator Kalani from Hawaii asked whether this represented a systemic failure of AI ethics frameworks in the healthcare industry, which was another redirect, this one toward the industry collectively. Ava said, "I can't speak to the industry's failures. I can tell you mine. The industry can account for itself separately." She was in the room for 2 hours and did not deflect once. Damon watched it from the gallery and felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Not forgiveness, which was still somewhere further down a road he hadn't finished traveling, but a specific kind of respect that had nothing to do with liking someone and everything to do with watching a person refuse to be smaller than the moment required. He testified at 2 in the afternoon. He hadn't written anything down. Ava had offered him a prepared statement, which he'd declined. Marcus had suggested bullet points, which he'd also declined because bullet points were for people who didn't know what they needed to say, and Damon knew exactly what he needed to say. He'd known since the diner, maybe earlier, maybe since the letter from the insurance company 4 years ago, maybe since the moment Sarah had taken it from his hands and set it on the counter and said, "Okay, what else do we try?" He sat at the table and gave his name and his background, the Navy, the injury, the separation, the move to Denver. He talked about Sarah without notes, in the specific unadorned language of a man who had no interest in making his grief eloquent. He said she was a fourth-grade teacher. He said she liked terrible reality television and excellent novels, and that she made the best green chili he'd ever had in his life. He said she was 34 years old when she died, and that Lily was 5 and didn't fully understand what she'd lost yet, and that watching her understand it gradually, in pieces, over the years since, had been one of the hardest things he'd ever experienced. He said, "The denial letter said the requested treatment did not meet the cost-benefit threshold for authorization." I read that sentence 4 times. I kept thinking it was talking about money, about whether the treatment was worth the cost to the insurance company. He paused. Eventually, I understood it was also making a claim about whether Sarah's life was worth the investment. And some system, somewhere, had run that calculation and come up with an answer, and nobody had checked it, and nobody had been required to explain it to us, and nobody had put a human face on the decision. He said, "My daughter is 9 years old, she is funny and sharp, and she misses her mother in ways she's still finding language for. She deserved to have her mother at her birthday this year, and the year before, and the year before that. I don't know for certain that the denial killed Sarah. I know it didn't give her a chance." He stopped. "That's what I want this committee to understand. It wasn't about efficiency or resource allocation, it was about a chance. And the system took the chance away before anyone with a face and a name had looked at her file." The room was very quiet when he finished. Senator Wynne thanked him and began to speak, but Damon looked across the room to where Ava sat at the side. Not the witness table anymore, just a seat along the wall. And she was looking at him with an expression he'd seen only once before, in the small room in San Francisco with the bad coffee and the courtyard going dark. The look of someone who had been carrying something alone for a long time and was finally, slowly, setting it down. He looked away first, back to Senator Wynne, because there were more questions, and he'd come here to answer them. The coverage was immediate and significant. His face was on every major platform by evening, not the blurry security footage this time, but the committee footage. Damon Cross in a plain blue shirt at a Senate witness table, talking about his daughter and a woman who had liked terrible reality television. The clip ran 11 million times in the first 18 hours. Media producers started calling it the most watched congressional testimony in 5 years, which seemed like an odd metric and probably wasn't accurate, but the sentiment underneath it was real enough. 3 sitting senators announced new AI oversight legislation by Friday. The FTC expedited its review of Medicor's licensing agreements. 2 of the 17 insurance networks that had licensed Medicor issued preemptive public statements of cooperation before anyone had asked them to, which Detective Reyes, calling to congratulate him on nothing in particular, described as what happened when large institutions got scared of being the last domino. Roy Calder watched the testimony from his attorney's office in Cincinnati. Damon found this out from Reyes, who found it out from Calder's attorney, who mentioned it in a way that suggested it had mattered to his client. Calder didn't reach out directly. Damon didn't expect him to. Some griefs weren't ready for direct contact, and understanding that was enough. What Damon didn't expect, what genuinely surprised him, in a way that not much had surprised him in years, was Lily. He came home Thursday evening to find her sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, watching his testimony. She'd found it herself, apparently, after a kid at school told her it was online. She watched the last 4 minutes of it while he stood in the kitchen doorway, still in his coat from the airport. When it ended, she closed the laptop and looked at him. "You talked about Mom," she said. "Yes. The green chill thing is true. It's absolutely true." She was quiet for a moment. "Were you scared?" "A little. More just—" He paused, aware of the size of it. Did it help, saying it out loud in front of all those people? He thought about it. Really thought, because she deserved the real answer. "I think it gave the story somewhere to go," he said, "instead of just being ours. Does that make sense?" Lily nodded slowly. Then, "I think Mom would have been embarrassed about the green child part." "She would have been mortified," Damon agreed. Lily smiled. It was the real one, the unguarded one, the one that had been her mother's before it was hers. "But she would have liked that you said it," she said. He sat down across from her and didn't say anything for a while, and Lily didn't either. And outside the window, the Denver evening was doing what Denver evenings did in November, cold and clean and not apologizing for itself. He and Ava spoke the night after the hearing, later than usual, almost midnight her time. She was still in Washington. He was back in Denver, the apartment quiet. "It went further than I thought it would," she said. She didn't sound triumphant. She sounded like someone coming down from a very high place and not yet sure what the ground felt like. "Legislatively," he said. "Legislatively. And—" she paused. "I've been getting calls from families. From the 1,214. Not through the Foundation's intake process. Directly, through my office." Another pause. "My assistant has been taking messages. There are a lot of them." "What are they saying?" "Different things. Some of them are angry. Some of them are—" her voice shifted slightly. "Some of them are just saying thank you, for saying the names out loud, for not hiding them in aggregate data." Damon sat with that. "I don't know what to do with thank you," she said quietly. "From those families. It doesn't feel like the right response to what happened." "It's not a response," he said. "It's a beginning." She was quiet for a moment. How do you hold both things at the same time? The weight of what's wrong and the small beginning of something different. "You just do," he said. "You don't resolve it. You hold it." "Does it get easier?" He thought about Sarah's notepad and Lily's unguarded smile and the cracked mop handle he'd never filled out the maintenance form for. "Some of it does," he said. "The parts that are supposed to." Another silence, softer than the ones earlier in their acquaintance. "Damon," she said, "what you said today about Sarah, She stopped. "I'm not going to say I'm sorry again because you've heard it enough and words are starting to feel like the wrong unit of measurement for this." "Yeah," he said, "but I want you to know that I heard every word you said in that room, and I'm going to be hearing it for a long time." A pause. "I thought you should know that." He looked at the kitchen window. The streetlight was steady now, fixed, no longer flickering. "I know," he said. "Get some sleep," she said. "You too," he said. He sat in the kitchen for a while after he hung up, not thinking particularly, just sitting with the quiet of the apartment and the distant sound of traffic and the specific feeling of a day that had been very large and was now, finally, becoming smaller. Tomorrow would be ordinary. Lily's breakfast, the walk to school, the mop and the linoleum and the cracked handle he still hadn't replaced. He needed the ordinary tomorrow. He needed it badly. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. The maintenance request form for the cracked mop handle was finally submitted on a Monday morning in January, 14 weeks after Damon had first noticed the crack, and 8 weeks after his face had been on every major news platform in the country. He filled it out at the utility closet, same as always, using the same pen that lived in his shirt pocket, the same clipboard that hung on the same nail. Larry from facilities accepted it with the same mild nod he gave every maintenance request, and that was it. 3 minutes of his Monday morning resolved. He stood in the hallway afterward and thought about how strange it was that some things stayed exactly the same size regardless of what happened around them. The linoleum still needed mopping. The supply closet still smelled like bleach. Marcy at the front desk still pulled on her coat at exactly 4:52 every afternoon. The world that existed inside Jefferson Elementary operated on its own time and its own logic, and Damon Cross had spent 8 months being grateful for that. The specific mercy of work that required your hands and left your head alone. He'd given his notice 3 weeks earlier, not because he'd stopped valuing what the job was, but the simplicity of it, the clear objective, the absence of ambiguity, but because something else had become necessary. He'd fought that conclusion longer than was probably rational, sitting with it through December and into the new year, turning it over the way he turned over decisions he didn't fully trust himself on yet. But eventually the conclusion had won, the way honest conclusions usually did. His last day was a Friday in late January. Marcy gave him a card signed by the whole office staff. Larry gave him a handshake and told him he'd been the most reliable person in the building for 3 years, which was the kind of compliment that meant more coming from Larry than it would have from almost anyone else. The principal, Dr. Anand, walked him to the front door and said she hoped he understood the difference he'd made, and Damon said he hoped she knew she ran a good school, and they shook hands, and he walked out into the January cold for the last time as a janitor. He stood on the front steps for a moment. The morning was bright and dry, the kind of Colorado winter day that looked warmer than it was. Down the block, a kid on a bicycle was navigating around a patch of ice with the intense concentration of someone who knew exactly how much it was going to hurt if they fell. He watched until the kid made it through safely. Then he walked to his car. Sterling AI's Denver office occupied the top 2 floors of a building on 17th Street, which Ava had chosen specifically because she'd wanted the advocacy division to have its own physical presence separate from the San Francisco headquarters. A deliberate signal, she'd said, that the work wasn't an appendage of the company's main operation, but a thing with its own weight and address. Damon had visited twice during the build-out phase, and both times had said it looked fine, which Ava had accepted with the particular expression she used when she thought someone was being willfully unhelpful. His official title was Director of Patient Advocacy, which he'd agreed to after a 20-minute argument about whether director was the right word for a role that he described as making sure the company never again confused efficiency with conscience. Ava had said director was accurate and that he was going to have to accept that some things had titles whether he liked it or not. He'd said that was a very corporate thing to say. She'd said welcome to the corporation. They'd gone back and forth like that for a while, which had become, without either of them formally deciding it, the way they talked to each other. A specific friction that was more comfortable than agreement. A shorthand that had developed over months of hard conversations and bad coffee and the slow erosion of the professional distance they'd both initially needed. The foundation had processed 412 claims in its first 3 months of operation. Not settlements, claims, each one reviewed by a 3-person panel that included at least 1 medical professional and 1 patient advocate from outside the company. The compensation amounts were determined by an independent formula, but the process itself was built to require that someone read every file, every name, every specific story before any decision was made. No algorithm, no cost-benefit threshold. Every file got a face. Damon had read every single one. Not because his role required it. Technically, he was responsible for policy development and systemic review, not individual case intake. But in the first week when the files had started coming in and the intake team had begun processing them with the efficient, compassionate professionalism Ava had hired them for, Damon had sat down one evening after everyone else had gone home and opened the first file. He'd read it in 40 minutes. A 61-year-old woman in Memphis named Doris Wayland, retired librarian, denied authorization for an immunotherapy protocol for non-small cell lung cancer in 2019. Approved 2 years later, after the window for maximum efficacy had closed. Still alive as of the intake date, but the prognosis had changed materially. She'd included a handwritten note with her claim, not asking for anything specific, just saying she wanted someone to know that she'd had a garden she couldn't tend anymore, and that she'd planned to travel to Portugal for her 65th birthday and hadn't been able to, and that those things weren't catastrophic, but they were hers, and she'd lost them. He'd read Doris Wayland's file and then the second file, and by 11 o'clock he'd read 19 of them. He'd gone home and made tea and sat at the kitchen table in the dark for a while. Not sad exactly. Something beyond sad. Or before it, the flat open terrain of bearing witness to something that couldn't be unfixed. He'd read all of them. It took 6 weeks. He did it after hours, 2 or 3 files a night, and he never told Ava, and she never asked, but she knew, the way she knew most things about what he was doing without requiring him to explain it, which was one of the things about her that still surprised him sometimes. The quality of her attention, how precise it was when she chose to use it. On the day the 412th claim was processed, she came to his office, a real office, with a door and a window and a plant Lily had insisted on bringing from home, and set a folder on his desk. "What's this?" he said. "Roy Calder's formal cooperation agreement with the Senate subcommittee is finalized," she said. "He's going to testify next month." She paused. His attorney also submitted a claim on his behalf. For Marcus. Damon looked at the folder. "I know." He'd been notified by the intake team the week before. "The panel can handle it without your involvement, given the circumstances." "The panel will handle it the same way they handle every file," he said. "I'm not going to make Marcus Calder's claim different because of what his father did." Ava looked at him. "I know," she said. "I'm telling you it's okay if you need distance from it." "I don't." He looked up from the folder. His son deserved a pediatric surgeon's life. That's the file that goes to the panel. She nodded. She started to turn toward the door, then stopped. "Damon." "Yeah." "Do you think Roy Calder is going to be okay? Eventually?" He considered it honestly. "I think he's going to have a harder time than most, because he did something with his grief that he'll have to carry." He paused. "But I think he's got enough anger left to become useful. And angry people who find something worth fighting for, they tend to find their way through." Ava leaned against the doorframe. "Is that what happened to you?" "I found Lily," he said. "That came first." He looked at the plant on the window sill. "Then I found a parking garage." She almost smiled at that. Not the professional version, the real one, the one he'd seen maybe a dozen times in 8 months and which always arrived like something she hadn't planned on. "You really are terrible at accepting anything. I accepted the director title. Under duress. Still counts." She pushed off the doorframe. "The board meeting is at 3, if you want to join." "I'll be there." She left. He sat at his desk with the folder and the plant and the window and thought about the distance between a utility closet on the East Corridor and this office on the 17th floor of a building on 17th Street, and whether that distance was progress or just change, and decided it was probably both, and that probably both was the honest answer to most questions worth asking. He visited Sarah's grave on a Saturday in February, which he did every year on the anniversary of her death. He went alone, the way he always went. Lily had come with him twice, and both times had ended up okay, but hollowed, and he decided that some forms of grief were better kept separate, that Lily didn't need to watch him at the graveside to understand that he still carried her mother, because she could see it in every day he lived. It was cold and overcast, the sky the particular gray of Colorado February, the ground hard and dry. He stood for a while without saying anything, which was how he usually did it. He wasn't a man who narrated at graves. He just stood and let the weight of it be what it was. He thought about the Senate hearing, about saying her name in that room, the green child, the terrible reality television. He thought about Doris Wayland in Memphis, and 411 other people whose names he now carried, the way you carried things that had been given to you without your permission, but that you'd decided to hold with care anyway. He thought about 8 seconds in a parking garage on a Thursday in October. "I didn't know what I was walking into," he said aloud, because sometimes words were necessary even when there was no one to hear them. "You probably would have told me that was typical." He looked at the headstone. "Lily made me get a plant for the office. A succulent," she said, "because she knows I'll kill anything that needs more than weekly water." He paused. "She's right." The wind moved through the cemetery, dry and flat. A pair of sparrows moved across the ground 20 feet away. She's complicated," he said. "You would have had very specific opinions about her. I've been trying to figure out what they would have been." He paused for a long time. "I think you would have started skeptical and then gotten past it faster than me. You always did." Another pause. "I'm getting there." He stood a while long. He didn't resolve anything at the graveside.
he hadn't expected to, had long since stopped expecting graves to provide the kind of clarity people in movies got from them. What he got was time. Time in proximity to
To the fact of her, the unambiguous and permanent fact, and time had its own value separate from resolution. Before he left, he said, Lily wants to start cooking dinner on Sundays. Actual cooking, not sandwiches. She's been watching videos. He looked at the headstone. I told her if she makes something inedible, I'm ordering pizza. She said that was fine because she's a better cook than me anyway. He almost smiled. She's not wrong. He drove home and made coffee and spent the rest of the morning quietly, and it was enough. The conversation he'd been avoiding for 3 months happened in late February, on an evening after Lily was asleep. Not because Damon had planned it, but because Ava had driven from the Denver office to drop off documents he could have received by email, and they both knew it, and they'd ended up at the kitchen table with the same bad coffee from the same diner she'd gone to after the diner became a normal place. They went together sometimes, and eventually the documents were sitting untouched on the counter. You drove 40 minutes to drop off a folder, he said. I was in the neighborhood. Ava. She looked at her coffee. I was not in the neighborhood. No. She was quiet for a moment. The kitchen was warm and the apartment around them was the specific quiet of a sleeping child, that particular quality of silence that had presence in it. I've been thinking about something, she said, and I've been trying to find a responsible way to bring it up. There isn't one, he said. Just bring it up. She looked at him. I don't want to make this complicated. What we're doing, the work, the foundation. I don't want to do anything that makes that complicated or that makes you question whether, Ava. He said it quietly, not impatiently. Just say it. She held his gaze. I like coming here, she said. Not just to the office. Here, to this kitchen. I like it when Lily argues with me about my opinions on animated movies, which are apparently wrong across the board. I like the coffee, which is terrible. I like... She stopped, started again. I like you. And I don't know what to do with that, given everything, and I'm not asking you to do anything with it. I'm just... She exhaled. You told me once that honesty matters more than comfort. I'm trying to practice that. Damon looked at his coffee cup. The kitchen was quiet and warm around them, and outside the February night was doing what February nights did, cold and indifferent, and not caring in the slightest what happened inside the lit windows of small apartments. He thought about a cracked mop handle and a bad decision, and 8 seconds, and where 8 seconds had led. The entire improbable chain of it, the way a single choice in a parking garage had pulled everything that came after into a shape neither of them would have predicted or asked for. He thought about Sarah and about the difference between honoring what you'd lost and using it as a reason to never risk anything again. He'd been doing the latter for a long time. He knew that. Lily knew it. Marcus had known it since approximately month 3 of their friendship and had been waiting patiently for Damon to catch up. I'm not there yet, he said. I want to be honest with you about that. There are still things I'm working through and I don't want to shortcut them. Ava nodded carefully. Okay. But I'm not nowhere either. He looked at her. I don't know how to say that without it being either too much or not enough. It's enough, she said. It's exactly enough. They sat with that for a while, in the good way. The way where the silence between two people has stopped being something to fill and started being something that belongs to both of them equally. The animated movie opinions, he said finally. Lily is very passionate about them. She's right about most of them. She told me that specifically, Ava said, verbatim. I believe it. He looked at his coffee. She also told me you were, and I'm quoting her here, actually pretty cool once you stopped being nervous. Ava went very still. She said I was nervous? She says everyone's nervous when they first come over. She finds it endearing. She's 9. She's very perceptive. Ava laughed, a real laugh, brief and slightly startled, the kind that happened before she could decide whether to allow it. He didn't hear it often. It was better than the professional version of almost anything she did. I was a little nervous, she admitted. I know, he said. I found it endearing, too. She looked at him. He looked back. And the thing that had been forming for months between them, not defined, not named, built out of hard conversations and bad coffee, and a kind of honesty that most people never managed with strangers, let alone with someone who had every reason to be their enemy, sat in the kitchen with them, present, and patient, and not requiring anything from either of them tonight beyond the acknowledgement that it was real. Spring came to Denver the way it always did, tentatively and then all at once. By April, the walks to school had lost their teeth. By May, Lily had graduated from watching cooking videos to executing them with the focused ambition she brought to everything she decided mattered, and the Sunday dinners had become a genuine event. Damon doing dishes while Lily narrated every decision she'd made and why, developing in real time an aesthetic philosophy about food that was confident and frequently correct. The foundation reached 700 claims processed in March, 850 by May. The independent audit's public release had generated 4 pieces of federal legislation still working through committee, 2 of which had bipartisan support substantial enough that they were expected to pass. 3 other healthcare AI companies had voluntarily suspended similar algorithmic systems pending independent review, which Ava described as the self-interested kind of right decision, and Damon described as still a right decision, and they disagreed productively about that distinction for most of a Tuesday afternoon. Sterling AI had lost 58% of its valuation in the 6 months following the announcement. 2 of the board members who'd wanted to remove Ava had resigned instead, one of them publicly, in a way that had generated its own small news cycle. The company's revenue had contracted significantly, but had not collapsed, partly because several institutional clients had stayed specifically because of the transparency. Organizations that had their own reasons to value a vendor, whose first instinct under pressure had been disclosure rather than concealment. Ava was rebuilding it slowly, from the inside out, and it was not clean or linear or the kind of redemption arc that made for a tidy story. There were weeks she called him from San Francisco at 10 at night, sounding like someone who had made a terrible mistake and couldn't locate the exit. There were board meetings that required him to talk her through the long version of why the right thing and the hard thing being the same thing was not a permanent condition. There were moments when the weight of 1,200 families and the ongoing legal proceedings and the legislation and the board politics all pressed down at once, and she was not graceful about it. She was short-tempered and occasionally wrong and sometimes made decisions based on speed over wisdom and had to reverse them. She was imperfect in the specific ways of a person who had been running fast for a long time and was learning, at significant cost, to slow down. He respected it. He also told her when she was getting it wrong, which she'd asked him to do and which she did not always thank him for in the moment, though she usually came around. The thing between them developed the same way, slowly, imperfectly, without a clean timeline or a decisive moment he could point to and say, "That was when." It was more like a succession of ordinary things accumulating weight. Ava at the kitchen table on a Sunday, while Lily tried a new recipe and narrated every step with theatrical authority. Ava at Lily's soccer game in April, standing beside Marcus on the sideline, learning the specific etiquette of youth soccer from a retired firefighter who had very strong opinions about it. Ava and Lily arguing about whether a particular animated film had a satisfying ending, which Lily maintained it did not, and which Ava had initially disagreed with and which she eventually grudgingly conceded after Lily laid out her structural argument with the precision of a very small litigator. Lily had decided she approved, which she communicated to Damon not with words, but with the simple fact of treating Ava with the same matter-of-fact inclusion she extended to Marcus and Elena. A seat at the table, a place in the ordinary rhythm, an assumption of presence. For Lily, that was the whole endorsement. She didn't do ceremony. Damon watched it happen and felt the complicated layering of things that didn't resolve neatly. The grief that was still there, quieter now but present. The particular love that didn't evaporate because someone was gone, and alongside it, something new and tentative and real. He didn't try to separate them or rank them. He'd learned to hold them together, the way you learn to hold anything complicated, not by solving it, but by making enough room for all of it to exist without crushing the parts that were still growing. On a Saturday evening in June, he took Lily to a park on the eastern edge of the city that she'd been asking about for 2 months, one of those newer parks with a section that had been deliberately left unlandscaped, native grasses and wild prairie plants growing in an unruly spread between the walking paths, the kind of intentional wildness that looked like neglect until you looked closer. They walked the path around the perimeter as the evening came down, the sky going from pale blue to the specific warm orange of Colorado evenings that tourists always seemed surprised by and residents took quietly for granted. Lily had been talking since the parking lot, something about a science project, something about Priya, the long division injustice which had apparently evolved but not resolved. And Damon walked beside her and let the words wash over him in the comfortable way, the way that meant he was listening without having to hold every word. She ran out of things to say somewhere in the middle of the path, and they walked in silence for a while, and then she took his hand the way she still did sometimes, the automatic unself-conscious gesture of a kid who was getting older but hadn't yet decided that was a reason to stop. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. Are you happy?" He looked at the sky, at the wild grasses moving in the warm evening wind, at the city in the distance and the specific latitude of the moment. Standing in a park on a June evening with his daughter, the weight of the year settling into something that was not resolution exactly, but was livable, was actually livable in a way that felt earned rather than temporary. He thought about 8 seconds in a parking garage, about a cracked mop handle in a diner on Colfax with bad coffee, about a woman at a podium refusing to look for an exit, about 412 names he carried, and 700 more, and the ones still coming, about Roy Calder's son, 19 years old, who had wanted to be a pediatric surgeon and who mattered, whose mattering could not be undone no matter what happened next. About Sarah, who had taken a letter from his hands and set it on the counter and said, "Okay, what else do we try?" And who had been braver than he'd understood at the time, who had been braver than most people got to witness up close, and who he had been lucky enough to love for the years he'd had. About Lily, standing beside him right now, her hand in his, asking him a question he used to think he'd never be able to answer honestly. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." She nodded, accepting this the way she accepted things that mattered, not with fanfare, just with the quiet weight of someone who'd wanted the true answer and gotten it. "Ava's coming Sunday," she said. "I know. I'm making the tomato pasta, the good one. You say that every time. Because it's always the good one." She kicked a stone off the path. "Should I make enough for her to stay for dinner?" He looked at the sky again, at the orange going deeper now, the first stars becoming visible at the upper edge. "Yeah," he said, "make enough." Lily let go of his hand and walked slightly ahead, the way she did when she'd gotten the answer she was looking for and was ready to move on to the next thing, and Damon Cross stood on the path in the warm June evening and watched his daughter walk through the wild grasses with the specific, unself-conscious ease of someone who trusted the ground beneath her feet. He'd spent 4 years learning that the past couldn't be rewritten. That was a true thing, and he'd paid for the knowledge of it in the way you paid for true things, with time and grief and the slow, hard work of continuing anyway. But there was another true thing he'd been slower to learn, or maybe he'd known it and needed reminding. That the past being unalterable didn't mean the future was fixed. That 8 seconds could change 2 lives. That a woman could look at what she'd built and choose to unmake the worst of it. That a cracked mop handle was just a cracked mop handle until the moment you decided what to do next. He thought about Sarah in the beige office with her notepad, writing down Marinvax in her careful handwriting, because she always wrote things down rather than trusting herself to remember them under stress. He thought about what she'd been doing in that moment. Not giving up, not despairing, just gathering information, just figuring out what else to try. He had tried to stop trying for a while. He understood why he'd done it. He didn't blame himself for it anymore. But he was done with it now. Down the path, Lily turned back to look at him, her face lit by the last of the evening light, impatient and bright and entirely her own. "Dad, come on." "Coming," he said, and he walked forward to meet her.